right, there you go. There's our new series. Hey, before we get into that, though, real quickly, I forgot to dismiss the kids. So if kids head off, follow your teachers. Let's give it up for our kids. They follow their teachers back. All right. Well, hey, today we are diving into, no pun intended, a new series called Cannonball. And we're over the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at what it is to live out the kind of faith that makes some waves, that has a ripple effect. When it comes to our neighborhood, when it comes to our community, when it comes to our lives, what does it look like to really live a life that has a kingdom impact, that has an influence and a life of real significance and value, not for ourselves, but for God. And what we're going to come to discover is living this life of kingdom impact, this life that leaves a ripple effect, it's not something you can just swan dive into. It's not something that's going to be neat and tidy and clean. I mean, how many of you know that the walk of faith, it isn't always this like neat little packaged thing that goes the way we plan, goes the way we expect, goes the way we think, and especially when it comes to living the kind of life that lives a ripple effect, as we're going to come to discover over the next several weeks, it takes a kind of a cannonball sort of mentality. That sort of this willingness to regardless of the stumble, regardless of the falls, regardless of how it looks, a willingness to sort of dive and go all in to this faith and this following and this call of Jesus on our lives. In fact, I put it in my notes this way, and this is sort of the big idea for tonight, which is that you can't make a wave without a willingness to take a fall. You can't make a wave without a willingness to take a fall. So often I think one of the biggest misnomers when it comes to coming to faith in Jesus, is that all of a sudden when I give my life over to Jesus, whether you did that 12 years ago, whether you did that last week, maybe you've never done that, maybe tonight's your night. And I think one of the big misnomers with it is that all of a sudden when I get this new identity, I get this new purpose, I get this new heart, that all of a sudden I'm not going to have the same struggles and the same stumbles and the same falls and the same issues I had before. Like all of a sudden it's just going to just sort of miraculously, all the change that God's going to do in my life is going to happen right there in that moment. And God sometimes does change you instantly in a moment in some areas, but what I come to find and what we're going to come to discover is more often than not, it tends to be a process, and it's a process that involves a lot of stumbling. It involves some falls and involves even some failure in our lives. In fact, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how when you think of like companies, corporations have made big waves in the business world. One of the misnomers is that so often that they're just sort of overnight successes. But the truth is, the reason they got to a place of incredible influence, the reason so many of the companies that we trust, like Amazon and Walmart, all those things, is because along the way they had a few failures. Along the way they had a few stumbles, and yet they pushed through those things. Those things actually kind of breathed innovation and creativity. In fact, actually, I was just thinking about this, and I was thinking of some of the new product releases that didn't maybe go the way they thought it was going to go. And this first one was by Gerber. Gerber, who makes baby food, they thought, what a great idea if we could create an adult version for this. So they created, in 1974, they tried to create a Gerber singles for adults. So like beef burgundy, Mediterranean vegetable, blueberry delight. Yeah. Needless to say, that didn't go very, very well. Here's another one that kind of a new product release that flopped. Colgate entrees, which, well, the picture looks great. It's the Colgate. It's like in your mind, I don't know about you, but I can't get toothpaste out of my mind. So again, a kind of new product launch that failed, certainly in the beginning. Here's another one, Cheetos lip balm. Nothing sets the mood for romance like Cheetos lip balm. That didn't take off either. But if that didn't work, like just really set the mood, why not more than just Cheetos lip balm? How about a little Harley Davidson cologne, right? Nothing like sparks romance and that smell of like 2 straight days on the road without a shower, right? Or how about this for your pet? A Thirsty Dog came out with flavored water for pets. So you can for your pet that's not already way too spoiled, right? Or this one, which this one sort of speaks for itself, why it never took off. This was supposed to be an alternative for coffee drinkers, urinal, hot drinks just in. And then maybe the ultimate flop of all time, and probably many of you remember this, of a new product launch, New Coke, right? Like, why mess with such a good thing? It totally flopped. And yet, what we're going to come to discover is that those flops, those failures, they don't need to be fatal. They don't need to be the thing that defines us. And really, if we're going to live the kind of cannonball life, live a life that makes an influence, that makes waves, we've got to learn what it is to take a fall and how to keep on going. And so to unpack this and unpack this process, we're going to look at one of the ultimate cannonball stories. And it's a story we find in John chapter 9. It's one of my favorite miracles that Jesus would actually perform. And so we're just going to kind of jump right into this passage, John chapter 9, starting in verse 1. It says, as he went along, this is referring to Jesus here, it said he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, this might seem like kind of an odd question in today's time, but in first century Israel, it was a common belief if you had any type of physical ailment or even circumstantial struggle, that it must be because of some sin in your life. That God was somehow judging you for some decision, poor decision you made, or maybe your family made, or your parents made. And so it was kind of this, again, common sort of misconception, right? And so here's the disciples. They're asking, again, kind of a question that would have been common in that day. And of course, in the process, they sort of assume the worst, right? Like they assume the worst. Again, this must have been the cause of this guy's decisions. And by the way, sometimes we do the same thing. When things don't go the way we plan, things don't go the way we expect, things don't go the way we thought they should go, we tend to assume the worst. That somehow God maybe has forgotten us, God has somehow abandoned us, God is somehow judging us. And yet, I love his response. Going to verse 3, it said, Jesus' response to this question, he said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. That the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as this day we must do the works of him who sent me. A night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. I like that phrase, displayed. The Greek word display literally means to shine a light on something. Kind of like to flip the light switch. It's to highlight kind of what's going on. And I love that because part of the reason so many of us, we struggle to see God's work, transformative work, miraculous work in our lives, is because oftentimes God's greatest work is done in the dark. God's greatest work is oftentimes happens sort of behind the scenes. And in fact, I like how the psalmist poet, when speaks of one of the greatest miracles of life, which is life itself, said, you formed me, you created me in her innermost being within the womb of a lady. And it's kind of speaking of this reflection of how God, he works oftentimes, most often in the dark, most often sort of behind the scenes. And yet every once in a while, like in this story, God will choose to flip the switch. God will choose to sort of shine a light. He'll go all Motel 6 on us and leave the light on so we can see the process that he most often uses to work in our lives. And that's exactly what we see. It's amazing to me what he chooses to use to sort of shine the light on, to reflect his work in our lives, and certainly within the life of this man. Look, verse 6 says, after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Now, again, a crazy miracle. Now again, put yourself in this man's shoes, in this man's situation. Now, he's blind, but he's not deaf. Like, he can hear what's going on. So, he hears the disciples kind of, speaking doubt and kind of what speaking judgment and kind of questioning him and, hey, whose fault is it? Why is he the way he is? And it would have been really easy for him, I'm sure, just as he's hearing this, to get discouraged instead of thinking, yeah, maybe, why am I the way? You kind of start to doubt, God, have you forgotten me? God, have you lost sight of me? And yet in the process, as he's hearing this, as he's hearing these words, there would have been this moment, this glimmer of real hope for him. Because, as he's listening to this conversation, there would have been a moment where he comes to realize that Jesus is involved in this story. Like Jesus is in front of him. He'd probably heard the stories. He'd probably heard about the miracles they did. And I'm sure there's this moment where he's like waiting for Jesus to do the miraculous, to kind of respond to his brokenness, to respond to his blindness, and heal him in a miraculous kind of swan dive though kind of way. Like in his mind, my guess is he was probably imagining that Jesus would be like, wait a minute, guys, I'm going to heal him. I'm going to show and use this man's life to display my glory, to display my work, to display my purpose, my call here on the earth. And he's probably imagining in his mind that Jesus is going to whisper something really angelic. Or maybe he's going to, preach some great sermon to him or kind of put his hands on him. But that's not what he hears. What he hears is, that's what he hears, right? And as he's listening to this, he's probably really thankful that it seemed to miss him, right? He hears the spit. He's like, whoa, that was a close one, It's like, well, I guess there you have it. God's kind of judging me like everyone else is. Because this probably wasn't the first time he'd heard someone spitting. But it was probably the spit was more in his direction. And yet, it seems like Jesus missed, but the truth is what we're discovering in this story is actually he didn't miss at all. In fact, he knew exactly where he was spitting. He knew exactly the focal point of where he wanted to place this saliva, place this spit wad. As he gets in the dirt and sort of almost a scene sort of reminiscent of the creation account. Remember the creation story where God not just spoke, creation into existence, but when it got to creating man, it says he didn't just speak us into existence, but he actually took the clay and began to form us and began to mold us. In fact, John 1 actually speaks of the reality that the Godhead, the part of the Trinity that actually was part of the creative force in there was Jesus himself. The Word was flesh, and that was Jesus himself. It is reflected in that passage. Through him, all things were made. And so I love this fact. I love this picture of this guy who's not afraid, by the way, to get his hands dirty. Not afraid to kind of get in the mess and get a little dirt under his nails. And he creates this kind of spit wad of mud and saliva, and he kind of gets it all together. And I love sort of this picture and this reality and this reminder that Jesus, and this is what you got to get in the story, is that notice that Jesus made the mess before he made the miracle. Jesus made the mess before he made the miracle. See, sometimes the mud is a part of the method. Sometimes the mud is the material that Jesus uses most for the miracle. I was thinking about this. Just imagine yourself, you're at home, and all of a sudden someone rings the doorbell, and they ignore your no solicitation signs, and you open up the door, and they've got their vacuum cleaner there. I remember years ago when we were in Vancouver, my wife, she did hair for one of these vacuum cleaning selling companies. They had a storefront right next to her salon, and so she did a lot of the hair for these guys. And I remember kind of going and walking into one of these places, and one of the very first things they teach them, one of the very first things they train them on is step one, how to make a mess. And so they would take out their bag, and again, imagine it's in your house, and they're taking out their bag of tricks. They've got their sand, they've got their little glass of wine, they've got all these things to create a good mess, and they just start to throw it all out on your brand new carpet, right? Now, first you're going to be like, man, I'm going to kill these people, right? I'm like, what is this guy thinking? What's he doing? And yet something amazing tends to happen, though. Is like they make the mess first. But then when they rev up the vacuum cleaner 3000 Sucker-Rama, it's amazing how all of a sudden the mess just starts to disappear. The junk, the sand, the gravel just starts to get sucked up in this vacuum cleaner. And listen, I share that with you because that's kind of what Jesus is doing here, is that sometimes he'll allow some of the mud, he'll allow some of the mess, because without the mud and without the mess, sometimes we would never really see the miracle. We would never really see the full extent of what he's really doing. You see, it took a mess to reveal the miracle, because the truth is you might not give him glory if it didn't get a little messy. The truth is, you might not have never realized just how much of a work he's already been doing and working and molding and shaping in your life if there wasn't a little bit of dirt ahead of time. See, sometimes the mess is a part of the method that brings about the miracle. He makes the mud. He makes the mud. And again, he takes the mud and he puts it on those eyes. See, sometimes when God has a miracle in store for you, it gets worse before it gets better. That's what we see in this story. So he makes this mud, he creates this mess, and he puts it on this guy's eyes. And you can just imagine, I mean, he's just muddy. He's mud man, basically, at this point. It's like this drip of saliva and mud just kind of dripping down his face. And here's what he kind of goes on to kind of tell him. Verse 7 says, "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word Siloam literally means sent. By the way, I don't have time to really get into this, but there was a purpose, again, beyond just, Jesus wanting to make a mess to reveal the miracle. Why he did this mixture of saliva and mud is because he was actually anointing this guy. See, notice he didn't just send him to any pool. He sent him to a pool called Sent. In other words, I've got a purpose for you. I've got a plan for you, but it's not just for yourself. It's your purpose, why I created you, why I molded you, why I shaped you from the very beginning the way you are is because you're going to reveal my greatness. You're going to reveal my glory. I'm going to use your life. I've got a purpose. I've got a call on your life. And so it goes on. It says, so the man went and washed, and get this, came home seeing. So he went and washed and came home seeing. Now, again, if you just kind of surface read that, it can be easy to just kind of think this was a quick little easy journey and jaunt. Well, like, oh, nothing significant. I mean, there's no real details. There's no description there. It would lead us to believe that the journey was absolutely uneventful. But think about this. We're talking about a blind man who's never seen before. It's not like he used to see. It's not like he used to walk these streets of Jerusalem in the daytime. It's not like he used to cruise down the main road with his buddies from high school. It's not like he used to, just kind of hang out on one street corner or the next with this, clear picture of every twist and turn and every landmark. This guy, he was born blind. He hadn't seen any of this. And again, why I say that chances are this was much more than just a going to the pool and coming back. Like there was more to this journey. Is that you got to understand that the pool of Siloam was located on the south side of the city of Jerusalem. It was located in what was considered Old Town part of Jerusalem that day, sort of the original parts, the very original buildings and structures that were initially built in Jerusalem. Now here's the thing, though. While we don't know the exact corner that we come across this blind man, we can get a pretty good glimpse of where he was located by looking at the chapter before in John 8. And where Jesus was the chapter before was he was in the temple grounds. He was hanging out at the temple area. And so you got to understand where the temple is located. The temple is located on the whole other side of Jerusalem from the Pool of Siloam. And listen, I share that with you because what you come to discover is that this is more than just, hey, why don't you lean over, wash this mud off your face? He's calling this guy, this blind man, to walk through the entire city of Jerusalem. We're talking miles. This is more than a few feet. This is more than a few yards. We're talking miles. By the way, have you ever noticed sort of the audacity of kind of Jesus' commands in the gospel? Like Jesus was, when before he would do the miraculous, before he would do so many of these healings, it's amazing the audacious things he would ask. I mean, think about it. I mean, this is sort of how he rolls through the gospel. I mean, you think of the man with the shriveled hand, he'd be like, hey, reach it out. Reach it out. Or the paralytic who spent his whole life on this mat. He's like, hey, just get up and walk. Or this guy who's blind. He's like, hey, walk across the whole city, through all the busyness and all the traffic and go to this pool. Things that at the moment they had to have felt, there's no way I can do this. I don't feel I can do this, Jesus. I don't see how this is possible. And look, I bring this up, I share this with you because I think for some of us, this is the reason we fail to see the miraculous in so many of our lives. We fail to see God move, and God, we sit there and think, man, if only God would move in my marriage, God would move in my finances like I see him move throughout the Gospels, I see him move throughout the Bible. If only he would. And the reason I think so many of us failed and so often miss the miraculous, the impossible of God in our lives is because, listen, we're unwilling to do the impractical so oftentimes. We get upset when he tells us to serve. We sit there and think, well, I don't feel like I can do that. I don't feel like I've got the time. I don't feel like I've got the ability. I don't feel like I've got the capability. Or God, I need you to show up in my finances. I need you to provide in a miraculous way. And yet we sit there and God will command us, hey, why don't you start tithing? Why don't you start giving? And think, I can't do that. I don't feel like my finances are in that kind of place. I don't feel like I'm in a place where I can do that seemingly impractical step. Or my marriage is struggling. God, I need you to perform a miracle. And he says, why don't you get others involved? Why don't you actually take a step to go to counseling and get some real help? And it's like, I don't have the time for that. We don't have the resources for that. And we miss out on the impossible because so often we're unwilling to do the impractical that he calls us to. And when we do that, what happens is we